Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I will talk about UV unwrapping. UV unwrapping is basically a flat representation of your model. So think about this cube and think if you need to cut this cube open and lay it flat on a table. Now the reason we want to do that is so that we can project a texture or an image or a material onto a flat surface and then kind of wrap it back into the shape of the model, if that makes sense. So in the case of a cube, it's pretty simple. So I'm going to go to the UV editing workspace here at the top to just show you guys the basics before we're working on the model. So on the right hand side you can see the cube model, and on the left hand side you can see the unwrapped UV map for the model. If I click on these faces on the left hand side on the UV map, you can see that it highlighted faces on the model in the 3D viewport on the right hand side. So if I click on this face, you can see it's highlighting this face. If I click on this one, it will highlight another face. Now this cube has been unwrapped already by default. So most of the objects that you created in Blender will have an automatic UV map, so you don't really have to unwrap them. But it only will affect when you create your own 3D model and you need to unwrap that model. So this basically, if you can imagine following these two sides faces back up, and you fold this one and fold this one until it becomes a cube. So that's basically just to get a visualization of how UV unwrapping works. Now I have already created a light test material just to show you guys how to apply a material. So I'm just going to show you that texture that I created. And now you can see it's now basically underneath that flat UV map. And now if I change the material preview in the 3D viewport, you can see how this is now folded back into our 3D model, and now we can see the numbers on the 3D model. So if I click one of these face, it's actually highlight the face on the UV map on the left hand side. So this is just a very simple kind of example of how a UV map works in the 3D world. Let's go back to the layout tab, and I'm going to load a chair model project. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm not going to save this. And I'm going to open the chair model. Okay, here is a chair model. And very importantly, before we start any unwrapping, you want to make sure that the size is applied. So if I press the N shortcut to bring up the side menu, you can see that our chair scale is 111, which is correct. If you see different number than 111, you need to apply scale. Now remember, very easy to do that. Highlight the chair or click on it to select it, and then press Ctrl A and then select scale from the menu. And that's just going to apply the scale to this model to make the scale 111. So press N again to hide that menu, and with the chair selected, click on this UV editing workspace right here at the top, and that's going to take us into the UV editing workspace. So now we can see the chair on the 3D viewport on the right hand side. And on the left hand side, we have the UV map that we are going to create basically. So you can use the same shortcuts on the left hand side to navigate. So if you hold middle mouse, you can pan, and if you hold control middle mouse, then you can zoom in or zoom out. So I'm just going to position it like this so we can see it nicely. And then what I usually do is you can either see these two arrows here at the top. If you click this will automatically then show all the faces of the 3D model on the UV workspace. Or if these arrows are not selected, then you will manually have to select the faces to see them in the UV on the UV side. So basically, if I select multiple faces, you can see that now. We can see those faces right there, but I prefer to just have these arrows turned on so you can always see all the faces of our model. Now you can see the UV map looks very similar to the cube that we unwrapped earlier. That is because we are modeling this chair from a cube. Now the cube will have its own UV map automatically applied to it because it's a primitive object, and that's why it looks like the cube. But we will have to change this UV map so it looks a little bit better because they won't really work. So what you can do is a very easy way to unwrap most things like a chair or a table. You can simply highlight all the faces. So hover your mouse over your model, press A to select all the faces, and then right click, go to UV unwrap faces, and then you will see all these different options to kind of project or to unwrap the UVs of that model. But normally the one that works the best is Smart UV project. So if I click Smart UV project, it's going to ask me a few things. So you can set the angle limit. You can increase the margin between islands. Now each face or each combination of faces will be its own island. I'll call it the UV island. And then you can also set the area weight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave all these settings default and then just click OK. And I can see this looks pretty good actually. So we got all the faces laid out flat on this side. So if I click one of them, you can see it will highlight that face on the UV map. So I can click this one and you can see that's the face right there. So now we can basically project or apply a material on top of these flat faces, and that will be rendered on the 3D model. Another thing that you can do is you can unwrap certain parts of the model at a time. So let me show you how to do this. So let's say you want to have this face, and this face all together. They are actually together at the moment. So I've selected these three faces on the chair. The reason I want them together because if we have a texture that will run over from the one face onto the next face, you want this to be next to each other on this side on the UV map, basically so that the texture can flow without any interruption between these two faces, if that makes sense. So let's say if this face have a gap between this face, so the texture behind it there will be a seam. So it won't be a seamless connection between these two faces. Same with this face. So to unwrap these three together, I can select all three of them by holding shift, and then I can right click UV unwrap faces, and then I'm just going to select the top one unwrap because I just want to unwrap those three. And now you can see if we zoom out here and I move this out of the way, just press G, we're using the same shortcut. So you can use G to move, Alt to rotate, and S to scale. So I just moved that one, UV island, out of the way so we can see it. And as you can see, this is an exact representation of these faces just laid out flat. So we can do the same with the side as well. So I can select these faces, right click, unwrap, and pressing G. Move them away, maybe scale them. So let's say you want a texture that will flow from the legs up to there and then back to this leg. You want all of these faces to be next to each other in the map. Now currently they are all next to each other, which is nice. But let's say this face unwrap and place over there. So then the texture is not going to flow. There will be an interruption or a seam right there. So easy way to do this is just select those faces again like that, right click and unwrap, and then I'm just going to move them out of the way by pressing G, S to scale, and kind of just place them anywhere outside. Once you are happy, you can select all the UV islands by just dragging a box around them, and then go to UV at the top and then select Pack Islands. Now Pack Islands is going to try and kind of place them all inside of this UV box because of everything needs to be inside of this UV or inside of this box. Now you can see some of these UV islands are quite big because we didn't really scale them down. So what you can do is you can also select all of them UV, and then I can go average island scale, and that's just going to scale them and average the scale out. And then we can go back to UV Pack Islands, and now that looks much better. Now let's say if you want a seam somewhere, you can actually tell Blender that you want to have some seams. So to do that is press 2 to go into edge select mode. And I'm just going to highlight this edge right here. So to mark this as a seam is pretty easy. So just highlight that edge, right click, and then go mark seam. Now you can see that edge is highlighted red, which means it will be a seam. So now if I select go back to face select mode by pressing 3, if I select these two faces, right click, UV unwrap faces, unwrap, you will see that it's gonna try and kind of unwrap them individually. But if we don't want a seam, I'm just gonna highlight this edge again, right click, clear seam, so we don't have a seam there anymore. And now I'm gonna highlight these two faces again, right click, UV unwrap faces, unwrap, and now I can see they are perfectly connected because we removed that seam. So sometimes you don't want a seam somewhere, sometimes you don't want to seam. The most easy way to unwrap something that's like a chair or a table or something with flat surface is just to select all these faces by pressing A, right click, and then go to unwrap faces. Then use the smart UV project, and that usually gives me the best results with something like this. But if you have any problems, just do it manually. Just select some of the faces and unwrap those faces separately, and then go and select more faces. Unwrap those ones, select more faces, unwrap those one. Do the same with the bottom if you have any issues. So I can go in and I can select maybe all these faces like that, and I can right click unwrap, and it's just gonna unwrap those faces for me. So the idea is just to go around your model and try and create flat UV maps or UV islands for each kind of section or part of your 3D model. So I'm just going to press tab to go out of edit mode. Then I'm going to go back to the layout and simply save the project. So that's the basic of UV wrapping inside of Blender. Keep practice and I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye.